Riding shoes are often something taken for granted, but when it comes to riding in cold, wet and muddy conditions, things can soon get problematic. Now, whether you suffer cold feet, you have issues with your cleat engagement into your pedals because of mud, or if your shoes have just developed that horrible festering damp smell over time, we've got some tips that can help you out. Now, before we dive into the tips themselves, let's have a look at a bit of information on shoes that are specific for bad weather riding. Now, appreciated, not everyone has a set of dedicated winter shoes. Most riders will have their generic shoes that last them for most of the year. However, if you ride for more than 2 or 3 months in winter conditions, i.e. wet, cold, muddy, all that sort of stuff, every year, then they do make a sound investment, because although you're only going to wear them for those limited months of the year, that means they're going to last longer. So you're going to get several seasons use out of them, and also means you're not going to absolutely kill your conventional shoes. So it is going to work in the long term. Now let's just have a look and see what sets them apart as a winter shoe from your conventional style riding shoes. Okay, so let's start with the upper. Now, unlike your conventional style trail or cross-country shoes or whatever it is you're using, that will probably have a lot of ventilation on them, especially around the sort of the heel and the arch and the toe of the shoe, you'll find that winter shoes don't tend to have this as much. I mean, you will see little perforations in these, but they're more to let the moisture out. Now, you want to be looking for something that has a covered upper, in particular where the retention system is. So this one actually has a high top, and you can see it's got a boa system here. You'll find that most winter shoes will have some kind of covering, whether you've got laces, you've got boa, or whatever else going on there. It's a good idea because it means the shoe could be nice and flexible here in terms of getting the fit correct, and you just lock all of that away under a nice waterproof cover. Now, you will find, unlike your conventional riding shoes that do all year round, winter options tend to have big cuffs on the top, or a high top by design. Now, these ones have a neoprene style design on them for a few reasons. A, it's to lock in the warmth. B, it's to lock out the moisture there, but also to give you a little bit of ankle protection on them. There's nothing worse than bashing your ankle bone on a crank when it's really cold. It just hurts so much. However, there are 2 major types of off-road winter shoe. You'll find these ones that feel much more like a low-top shoe. They've just got this cuff. And then you get the ones that are a bit more like a boot that has proper ankle support, a bit more like a hiking boot, I guess you could say. You kind of need to pick what suits you. For myself, I want my shoes to feel just like my regular riding shoe, but offering me the warmth and the sort of the waterproofness. So that's the sort of option I have. Whereas Rich actually mentioned that he looks for something with more support, because he likes to treat his bike a bit more like a hiker bike sort of thing in the winter when you're off the bike that bit more. So just make sure you choose what is right for you. Now, probably the most important thing with your winter shoes is the fit. Now, there's a few things at stake here. So firstly, some people want to have bigger, thicker socks in winter. So if that's the case, you might want to size up. But also, some brands like Shimano tend to make their winter shoes bigger. Now, I'm typically a 46 in Shimano shoes, but I actually use the 45 because the 46 is so much bigger to give you the foot room for socks. I actually prefer to have thin socks. I don't find it makes me any warmer for the way that I ride. So I size down, and it still gives me plenty of wiggle room. Now, that is the absolute key. The thing you need to have is room for your toes to wiggle. Probably it's more important on a winter shoe than it is on your regular shoe. Because let's face it, when you're pedaling extended miles on a bike, your feet are not doing anything. They're subject to getting cold. And if you can't wiggle them like you would just by, the blood circulation from walking, you're going to get cold feet. It's that simple. And if they're bunched together, it becomes worse. So whatever brand and whatever style you're picking, take into account the socks that you're likely to wear and try them on. You can't be trying these things on. To head to your local bike shop, try on a variety of different brands. They're all going to fit differently to get the correct ones for you. Now, the lining on all winter shoes will tend to be insulated. You're going to get different offerings. So this one actually has a Gore-Tex membrane, and it has an insulated lining as well. So that Gore-Tex membrane retains a bit of breathability in the shoe, but more importantly, it locks that moisture at bay. So you're not going to get in, at least from this perspective. Now, although these ones do have that Gore-Tex insulated membrane in them, water can still find a way in. Right, don't forget the water, it finds the path of least resistance, in which case it's not going to get in here, here or here, it's going to run down your leg. So waterproof trousers is your best chance at locking all of the moisture out. Of course, that does work great, but let's face it, in some conditions it's just not going to work for some riders. But the good thing about having a dedicated winter boot with a cuff like this is when water does get in, it locks a very small amount against your foot and you'll stay quite warm. kind of like a wetsuit in winter weather, really, and winter conditions in the water. Whereas the opposite can be said for these. So because the fact they've got vents everywhere, you're going to get cold water coming in the whole time. Your feet are going to be Baltic, a bit more like swimming in a banana hammock in the North Sea, I'd imagine. Now, finally, the outer sole on winter shoes. Now, this is quite important depending on what terrain you have locally to you. Now, historically, a cross-country shoe, for example, will have next to no grip off the bike. Now, despite the fact you can mount studs on these, the rubber compound is fairly hard and there's lots of exposed carbon. So these in wet rock and roots and stuff like that are just awful off-road, but these are focused on cycling performance. A shoe like this has a twin rubber compound sole. It's designed to be better off the bike, and this sole is exactly the same. So this is a trail shoe. It's focused to be just as good off the bike as it is on the bike. And one of the keys is the toe flex at the front. So if that's the sort of thing that you need and you need to focus on, that is a good option. You can, of course, have something a bit more cross-country biased. This one has an extremely stiff sole, just like the summer shoes, but it does have a lot more rubber texture on it. And again, you can fit studs if you need them on the front. So just take into account what you need. But the toe flex that you can get on the trail style shoes is really good for walking off-road. Okay, so let's look at some tips and hacks then to try and get some of these features into your more regular riding shoes. Now, riding in winter means that your cleats are going to suffer far more abuse than they would normally. Now, you're going to get corrosion on those cleats from both the wet conditions, salts if you ride anywhere near roads and stuff like that. And let's face it, a lot of people, when they come in from a wet ride, you might sort of hose down your shoes or whatever and just sling them in a corner, but you're going to pay more attention to your bike using water displacing spray, lubes and stuff like that. You want to be doing it to your cleats as well, because these things can actually almost become part of your shoe. Now, there's a few things that can happen here. So I've got one of my wife's old shoes here with an SPD cleat on it. There's a rock wedged inside there. Now, you can get these out, but they don't always come out. And if that's the case, then getting the bolt out becomes a nightmare. Also, you can round these out, or worse still, the bolts can seize into the shoe itself. Now, this tends to happen if you fit these in the first place onto your shoe and you don't put grease or an anti-seize of grease on the actual threads of the bolt. Far too many people make the mistake of thinking, it's just a cleat, it's fine. Do yourself a favour. In the long term, just fit your cleats with a tiny little dab. It's all you need just to help them come out again when they're getting a bit of a mess. So the first thing you want to try and do is use some sort of fine pick. This one's got a tiny little head in it and you can really pick out the sort of stones and debris that find their way into that little 4mm Allen bolt. But if your bolt itself is a little bit rounded, before you go to the advanced stage, which is using drills and stuff, consider Allen keys like this that have a rifled end on them. They can be really good at getting bolts out like that. Now, if yours are in a mess, one of the only ways of getting them out is by drilling them out. Now, you've got a few options with this. You can get yourself like an easy out style kit. There's loads of different options. If you go to your online tool store, somewhere like that, or even just pop into the tool store. This set has a load of reverse thread bits, and then you've got specific drill bits to tally up with these. Now, the idea is you drill out that Allen key recess in the top there, and then you basically use that reverse thread to pull the bolt out. But if it is seized, you might not get it out, and you might have to get really hardcore and just drill the whole head off the bolt there to get the cleat off and then remove the rest of the bolt manually. And I've even seen people before having to take hacksaws to them, to the actual cleats to get them off. So do yourselves a favour in the long term and just fit your cleats with a bit of anti-seize, and treat your cleats as well after every sort of moist ride to a bit of water displacing spray just on the cleats themselves, and then put them to one side. Now, the last thing to reference with your cleats and your shoes is how the mud actually affects them. Now, depending on the cleat recess that you have on your particular shoes and the mud that you ride in, as well as a combination of pedals, you might find it a bit of a struggle to clip in certain mud. If you have like clay, for example, it can be really thick and quite difficult to get in. So there's a few little things here you might want to consider. Now, the first one is the style of pedal that you're already using. Now, to be fair, the classic SPD style mechanism works pretty well, but when you do get stones in them, they can be a little bit problematic. So you end up having to bash your foot on a pedal just to clear them, and then you can engage. But some systems like Time or the Crank Brothers have a system that's basically a little bit more open. You can generally push the mud through the pedal, but you can make a bit more of a difference by spacing the cleat away from the shoe slightly. Now, you do have to take this with a pinch of salt. If you space your cleat off too far, the shoe's going to become unstable. But you might find that one, just so you can see on here, I've got a little plastic shim on the underneath. It's just enough to really help it with the mud clearance for purging the mud out of the way when you engage. And you can also get these little metal cleats that, as well as spacing the cleat off the actual shoe, they also aid engagement and give a little bit of support, especially useful if you're using a tiny little pedal that doesn't have much in the way of support. So it kind of doubles up, pushes the cleat away, but also gives you a bit of support on the body. So definitely consider that, but make sure when you do this, use longer cleat bolts and obviously a little bit of grease or anti-seize on them. Okay, so let's look at how you can make your existing riding shoes feel that little bit warmer, whether they're flat pedal shoes or if they're clipping shoes like these. Now it starts with a bit of insulation, kind of common sense really. So the insoles that you'll get on your typical riding shoe, just a functional thin insole to give you a bit of support. These things, when it's cold, you get cold feet. As explained before, when you're sat around pedaling away, spinning those miles away, your feet aren't doing anything. So you've got all the air coming through to cool them down. Great in the summer, not so good in the winter. Get some insulated insoles. Go to any sort of style hiking or footwear store and you can get these. They already exist for the hiking world. Admittedly, you might need to trim them a bit to get the exact fit, so don't bin off your existing ones straight away. Or you can go ghetto, do the homemade version. Get the tin foil out, make a tin foil bed for your shoes, and then get your existing insoles and put them back in again. Now it makes a surprising difference. It can be a little bit crinkly to start with, admittedly, but you think it's just a foil barrier. And if you look at the major thing in insulated insoles that you can buy, they have foil as part of the design. It's right there, probably got some in the kitchen drawer. The next one, of course, is making sure your shoes are nice and warm before you go riding in the first place, and the same with your feet. So if you're driving to the trails, have some boots on or something nice and warm to keep your feet like that, and keep these maybe on your dashboard, on the heater in the car, or whatever it is. Keep them warm. If you start nice and warm, it's more likely you're going to stay warm. If you start cold, it can be incredibly difficult for your feet to get comfortable in the first place. Now, if we're talking extreme measures here, that for example you ride in somewhere where it's mostly mild conditions, so you only have a single pair of shoes, you can do some hacks. You can use a plastic bag. You can do it just over your toes, or you can do it over your whole foot. A little bit of waterproofness, but also locks in heat. Yeah, it can be a bit clammy, but it is a great sort of just to get by those particularly bitter days. The same concept works really well with a pair of nitrile gloves under your riding gloves. And in fact, that is one of the things that I carry with me in my riding pack in winter. A, for fixing things like punctures when you're all muddy and that, and B, just as a sort of get you home if you're really cold, just to slip them on under your gloves. It's a good thing. It does work quite well. I've heard that some people do this with foil as well, and they actually put foil over their toes and put them into their shoes. And you think the major bit where the ventilation is on the toe area, so that can make a significant difference with your regular ventilated shoes. And the last thing is a good pair of merino socks. Now these ones are nuke-proof riding socks, but they don't have to be riding socks. Some hiking socks that are merino. The key is making sure they're thin enough that they're going to fit into your shoes, because your regular shoes are going to be a closer fit on the foot. As soon as your feet don't have that wiggle in them, then you're going to get colder. So wiggling with some merino, and also they don't stink as well, which is also an added benefit. Okay, next up, waterproofing your shoes. Now, of course, if you have waterproof shoes in the first place, happy days, you're good to go. But when it comes to waterproofing your regular shoes, I'm going to use these cross-country shoes as a prime example. These things may as well be made of a net. They let in so much water and air. That's what they're designed for. It's designed to keep your feet cool, not what you want in winter. Now, you can get off-road specific overshoes. Now, yeah, you'll look like a roadie when you wear them, but they are absolutely brilliant. Now, they can be quite hard to find to fit your particular shoes, so it's definitely a case of asking around. I've heard the Spats ones are particularly good. These ones are the S-Fire ones from Shimano. They worked great, but I've also noticed they do these ones, which are a little bit more like, I don't know, like an off-road bootie. So it's not so much insulated, it's fleece lined, but it is waterproof and it covers your shoe. Now, that's a great thing to get if you've only got access to a pair of shoes like this. It's going to add some waterproofing and some insulation to winter shoes. And yep, they can be a pain to put on, but I'm telling you, it makes a day and night difference. Not even warm socks and stuff with these will come close to what you can get with overshoes on them. Waterproof socks, just reference them. This is not where I like to go, to be honest. I prefer the overshoe approach, but I know people that swear by using waterproof socks. There's loads of brands out there. Sealskins, of course, are one of the more famous ones, and they have a membrane in them. So yes, you will kind of boil in the bag a bit, but because they've got fabric, they feel really nice on your feet. Again, the issue that you do have with socks like those is generally they can be a little bulkier than what you're used to riding in. So you will need to try them with your shoes. At the very least, you're going to need to have your shoes a bit more open. But if it causes your toes to be bunched up, they're probably going to cause you just as many problems. You're going to get cold in them, even though you're not going to be wet. So it's up to you to balance that one out. As I said, I prefer to go the route of some thinner merino style socks that when you're wet, you do stay that little bit warmer, a little bit more comfortable, but hey, that's my preference. It might not work for you. Plastic bags. Yeah, I know, needs must, but it can genuinely help on those days when you're going out sort of bog snorkeling, just to get them properly waterproof. But don't expect to be comfortable. That is a proper hack, but I know loads of people that do actually do it, weirdly. And the last one is by using some sort of protector sprays. Now, it's not going to do anything on a shoe like this that's made from a synthetic material. It's not a fabric as such, and it's got loads of ventilation. It's clearly not going to work. But for example, I borrowed one of these shoes off one of the creators. This has a kind of like a fabric style Cordura upper. Now, this is a perfect candidate for experimenting with different sorts of waterproofing sprays. Now, don't get me wrong, you're not going to make a shoe completely waterproof by using any number of waterproofing products. These are just from outdoor companies, Fabsil and Granger's. There's loads available on the market, each with their own thing, saying their one is the best. Pick what suits you. But something I've done in the past, especially with flat pedal shoes that tend to have more fabric on them, is use beeswax. Now, this is made by Fjallraven, this particular one, and you use this, well, I use this on my wax jacket, basically. So the idea is you rub it over the shoe or the jacket and use a hairdryer or a heat source to melt it in. So that actually adds windproofing and quite a degree of waterproofness. It's a great little hack. With a pair of shoes like this, let's face it, they're not going to be the best in winter conditions, but you might be stuck with something like this that's just going to let water in. If you have anything that is fabric based, perhaps got ventilation on the toes, the wax element can make them a lot more comfortable. But be warned, if you are using this sort of wax in your waterproof jackets or the cotton jackets that they recommend using this in, the good thing about it is if you wash the jacket at over 40 degrees, you can remove that wax. So you start fresh again. It's not quite so easy when you put it on your shoes. However, I have done this and it has worked really well. Again, if you're willing to experiment, you could pick these bars up for I think 5-6 quid, something like that, and that would do your shoes several times over. Definitely good, even if it's just over the toes to keep it at bay. One of the benefits you can have as well by having a wax base on there, again, these ones feel like they're sort of almost like a Cordura, is using something like this on top of that coating afterwards, cotton-proof spray. A little bit of a hack there, using any of this stuff, but hey, needs must. And the last one is all about keeping the funk at bay. Now, if you've been riding in winter conditions long enough as a mountain biker, you will know that particular damp, musty, fetid, horrible smell that your riding shoes can get. Your pads can get it as well. And it's when they're almost in a permanent state of being slightly damp. Now, the first thing you can do about this is to wash your shoes. Now, when I come in from a ride, because I tend to ride from my doorstep and back, I'll hose down my shoes as I'm wearing them. So I get them as clean as possible. Then I'll start drying them out. Now, if you just let your shoes dry out when they're in a state of having pond water, ditch water, mud and stuff on them, there's a good chance that they're going to smell anyway just from that on them. So start by having clean shoes, then you want to get them dry. Now, the best way to do this on the cheap is using old newspaper. If you still read newspapers, if you've got access to them, scrunch them up, stuff the newspaper on the inside of the shoe and put them near a heat source. Now, you probably don't want to put your shoes directly on a radiator or a heat source because if they've got any sort of faux leather or even real leather on them, you might find it can crack. So just near a heat source, ideally just warm enough so they'll nicely, slowly drip dry and dry out properly. Now, something I swear by is using some sort of antibacterial spray. This one, of course, is for that sort of purpose, but you can get household cleaners like Dettol and various other brands out there. All you need is something that's not got bleach or anything. It's just an antibacterial spray. Something like for wiping your surfaces down will do fine, and it can really make a difference because that kills the bacteria that can turn into the smelly stuff. So it's a real good tip. If you, maybe finish riding and chuck your boots in the back of a van, give them a spray down with that and it just keeps the smell at bay that bit longer. And of course, if like me, you clean your shoes from the outright, it's great to put on them once they're dry. Now, I've got a shoe cleaner that GMBNTech viewer actually very kindly bought me a few years back, and it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, I still don't trust it, the fact you're putting dripping wet shoes on an electrical item, but hey, hasn't caught fire just yet. Dirt cheap, there's loads of different options on the market. pick something that suits you. Some of them have almost like a hairdryer style hose that goes in. This one has the opposite, feeds up into your shoe. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not going to dry a shoe that's completely dripping wet. You'll need to let them drip dry, but this is a great way of getting them dry enough that they don't develop that smell. And there we go. That's probably all the tips we can offer you on winterizing your shoes, I would say. I'd love to know if you've got any additional things that you've done to yours to make them a bit warmer, make them smell a bit less, anything like that. Or if there's any particular things that we've done here that have been useful for you, please do let us know in the comments underneath. And thank you as always for watching the videos here on GMBN Tech. If you haven't already, subscribe, come on, it's free content 4 times a week. Get involved, and thanks for watching the video. See you later.